Hey guys, how's it going? So, if you've been playing Fate for a while, you've probably looked up some of your servants to check their passives, ascension mats, or just trying to find some pretty nice good additional art for them. During this search, you probably have come across one or two unique passives that are clearly marked as belonging to certain servants. These are, of course, being Brynhild's Beloved and weak to Enuma Elish. I'll cover Brynhild's Beloved when I eventually cover her in the future, but weak to Enuma Elish is much more unique in its reasoning. This skill is linked to Gilgamesh, Archer Edition, and to his noble phantasm, kind of. We'll get into it. This skill deals additional damage to servants, as Gilgamesh himself is, for lack of a better phrase, the servant that defeats other servants. But before we go too in depth, we need to understand who Gilgamesh is, as he appears in Fate. Little side note, I will have an article that I use as a source linked in the description, so please check that out as well. Gilgamesh is described in Fate as the King of Heroes, because he was the very first recorded legendary hero, at least that we know about. He amassed all of the treasures in the world into his vault that would be known as the Gate of Babylon. When I say all of the treasures in the world, I do truly mean all of them. He had the prototypes of every single noble phantasm, and as such, is familiar with all of their weaknesses and strengths. This means a few things for him. 1, he's able to wield every single noble phantasm to some degree. 2, he is able to counter them. This does mean that Gilgamesh himself is weak to Gilgamesh. But Gil uses one particular sword as his most trusted armament, and the one that appears as his in-game noble phantasm. That is Ea, the Sword of Rupture. Now, the choice of the name Ea is interesting because that is the name of the Babylonian god of water, but this is not relevant as it is stated that the sword itself is nameless and that Gil simply chose to refer to it as Ea. Gil's noble phantasm in-game is Enuma Elish. However, the bonus effect of weak to Enuma Elish is not actually tied to that noble phantasm itself, it is entirely tied to his vault, the Gate of Babylon. So, what we can infer from this information is that the weak to Enuma Elish is a counter to servants, because Gil is able to see through their noble phantasms. To drive home this point, we can reference what Enuma Elish actually is in history. Enuma Elish is the creation story of Mesopotamia, with its name meaning when on high. The story itself is written on 7 tablets and tells the tale of how the god Marduk conquered chaos and created the world. Of course, Gilgamesh himself is a connection between the divine and mortal realm, and he is one who is on high. He was essentially the linchpin that decided the people of Mesopotamia did not need the gods on Earth any longer, and thus severed their connection. This is important to remember, because it kind of answers why even gods are weak to Enuma Elish, or at least that's the justification I'm giving to it, because otherwise it makes no sense. So, all who walk the earth and achieve great deeds are susceptible to weak to Enuma Elish then, if they are summoned as a servant then, right? Wrong. There are some exceptions to this rule, 3 types in total, those being the star attribute servants, aliens, and Kara no Kyokai, as well as a 4th kind of wishy-washy one we'll get into. Most servants that are exempt from weak to Enuma Elish are star attribute. Attributes are traits that every single servant in FGO has, but are usually able to be ignored because they are so hyper-specific. The star attribute is given to those who have lit the way for humanity in some way, also described as the hopes of humanity. This includes inventors like Da Vinci, great founders like Romulus, and another group that is kind of an outlier being the aliens. I'll go into why each of these groups may be excluded from being weak to Enuma Elish, but know that there are definitely some odd additions and exclusions, so let's get into it. This is the list of all of these servants currently in the game that are not weak to Enuma Elish. Naturally, the first group that I want to talk about are the Inventors, and those that possess a form of the Pioneer of the Stars skill, as they are fairly easy to understand in this context. For Inventors, they invented their own noble phantasms, so naturally there is no way for Gilgamesh to have a duplicate of it. Now, I do believe that an additional specification has to be added, because there are other servants that have invented their noble phantasms that are excluded here, such as Old Man Lee and Thomas Edison. I believe it is necessary that these servants in particular have to have theoretically transcended humanity by ushering in a new age for the species. This is manifested in-game as the Pioneer of the Stars skill, and its variants. Da Vinci and Nikola Tesla can be credited with helping humans rethink technology. Napoleon and Charlemagne served as an inspirational figure, existing as the light of possibility for their people. Francis Drake proved that you could actually navigate the entirety of the globe if you were able to have the persistence to get over the waves. And then the 2 outliers we have are Mozart and Sherlock Holmes. An argument could be made that Mozart revolutionized music, but I believe his real reasoning is tied to a throwaway line in Fate, where he could have been a host to a demon god pillar. He has no soul, according to him, as he sold it to create his music, thus creating something beyond the bounds of humanity. And then there's Sherlock. His noble phantasm seems to just him being really smart, and as such it can't be replicated by Enuma Elish. Other than that, I don't really see how he is on this list, but he is. Now for a couple of the weird ones. Romulus and Altera the Santa. Here is why they are weird. Starting with Romulus, he, of course, founded Rome, which is perhaps the most globally influential empire that ever existed. So, it makes sense why he is here. However, Romulus Caernus is absent. I don't really have an explanation for this, as the existence of Rome is not exactly something that can be possessed, and they are the same person, so why one has it but the other doesn't really make sense to me. Altera the Santa is the same way, in that she is an alien in Fate lore, but her Saber version is absent from this list. Again, I don't really have a real explanation from this, aside from perhaps the Sword of Mars that she uses, having once belonged to Gilgamesh at some point. Speaking of aliens, all of the Servantverse servants, save for Calamity Jane for obvious reasons, are exempt, as it would be impossible for Gilgamesh to have possessed their noble phantasms at some point. Interestingly, the only foreigner that is not weak to Enuma Elish is Abigail. The only real explanation that I have for this is the fact that Abigail herself has no power, being merely a child possessed by a Lovecraftian deity. Even in her legends, she isn't exactly known for being a great hero, she's more of an anti-hero, pointing out potential witches in Salem, so she never really did anything of note. As such, there's nothing that Gilgamesh could have given to her, or she could have possessed from him at some point. In fact, the key that she possesses is clearly not from this world. Mind you that you can make this exact same argument about How, but they put an emphasis on her beauty as the catalyst for her powers, so perhaps that's why she still has weak to Enuma Elish. The other foreigner that isn't from the Servantverse is our little lost child, Voyager. This is perhaps because he's from an alternate timeline, as well as being a fully human invention given life, and his noble phantasm being an achievement that not even Gilgamesh himself could do, that being breaking through the bounds of Earth and into deep space. Speaking of alternate timelines, the Kara no Kyokai servants are also exempt. The reason given in the article I have linked down below is probably the best explanation, that being that you can't replicate mystic eyes. The other explanation I will put forth is one that I have very little confidence in, but is kind of required to explain the remaining outliers. That is the fact that they are from an alternate universe. As much of a stretch as that may be, it could be that because they are quite literally existences from a different universe, Gilgamesh can't get a proper read on them, and as such, cannot counter them with his noble phantasm. The other members of this group are Castoria, Melusine, and Oberon. The one thing all of these characters share is that they are all from Lost Belt 6. What this may mean is that in this universe, each has created their own noble phantasm, or the one that they possess is one that's not found in our timeline. The one that is perhaps the easiest to explain with this is Melusine, because of what happens in her third ascension. You can argue that Arendite was something that Gilgamesh had, but her third ascension is something exclusively limited to her. And this would also explain why the other Fae girls still have this trait, as Barghast has a bastardized version of Galatine, and Fae Knight Tristan has the Falknot. Honestly though, it's a bit of a crapshoot on my end to try and guess these three, because at the very least, Castoria should theoretically exist in our timeline as well, but I guess some secrets are best kept hidden. But that is all I've got for you today. Hopefully you found this helpful in understanding Enuma Elish. If you did enjoy it, why not subscribe to catch more content like this? Like the videos, it really does help out the channel. Check out my Twitch for significantly less structured content. Join the Discord to be a part of our community. Follow my Twitter for some life updates. But for now, keep your chin up. Peace.